My name's Davina, and I'm from St Oswald's Hospice, and this is the lovely Laura Barrett, who is also from St Oswald's Hospice. I wonder what it felt like to hear, oh God, the hospice are going to come and talk to us, but that's going to be depressing and sad. And I wondered what words come to mind when you hear the word hospice. Is it death, dying, care? One of the things I really want to say on the outset is that we offer amazing end-of-life care, but that's only a bit of what we offer at the hospice. I was explaining earlier on that thank goodness people are living longer and longer with illnesses now, but we want the time that people have left to be full of quality and independence. So we do lots of work with people, sometimes over years, to make sure they can live as well as possible for as long as possible. The hospice is in Gosforth. I nearly said Gateshead. I've moved us. It costs 7 million a year to run St Oswald's Hospice, just that one site, and we get about 5.5 from the government. So we have to fundraise. How? 17. 17. What did I say?
7.
Oh, 17 million. 17 million a year to run the hospice, and we get 5 off the government. So we've got to fundraise 12 million. Thank you, Laura, keep me right. Every year and we do that through various ways. We've got our shops, which you've seen. And some of this is about fundraising that I'm going to talk to you about today. I guess, like Bruce said, is that, you know, how often do we think ahead to the future? Imagine as landlords, you're very good at planning things, that you're good at responding to things and make sure everything's in place. But personally, how many of us really sit down and go, what do I want to do? What do I want to happen at the end of my life? All right? Why do we find it so difficult to have the conversation? What words do we use instead of death and dying? What words? We find it really hard to say someone has died. What other words do we use? Popped your clogs. Anything else? Passed on. Yeah. Well, I've collected a few, and they might kick the bucket. Gone to heaven. Passed away. Gone to a better place. Does anybody remember the parrot sketch from Monty Python, where all of these things came up? Gone to sleep. 6 feet under. Pushing up the daisies. Pegged it, snuffed it. No longer with us, gone. Croaked it. Gone to meet their maker. Brown bread. Gone to the choir invisible. Popped their clogs. Shuffled off this mortal coil. Coco popped it. These are new ones, apparently. And my personal favourite, not this one, turned turtle or wearing the wooden onesie. These are all expressions that we would rather use than say somebody has died, somebody is dead, or somebody is dying. And I have no problem with whatever people call it, is that we find a way to talk about it. That we still find it difficult to have conversations about death and dying. I have to keep referring to my notes because I can't remember where I am. So really, Why do we think we find it hard to talk about these conversations? What stops us? Absolutely, it might make us really emotional to talk about it. Anything else? Sorry? Uncomfortable. Possibly like you're all feeling right at this moment. People find it frightening or morbid to talk about death and dying. You don't want to get upset, or you don't want to upset your friends and your families. The thing you said about emotions, we might be worried that we get really, really emotional, or perhaps we're just not ready to talk about that yet. There's this little bit of magical thinking. If we talk about it with somebody, it might make it happen. I certainly had that with my mum. She really wanted to talk about her wishes towards the end of her life, even though she wasn't ill. And I couldn't, because I thought it was morbid, I thought it was horrible, and I thought if we talked about it, she would die. There are lots of different religions where talking about death and dying is not welcome, because it is part of God's plan, and who are we to discuss it? And sometimes we're not sure whether it's our conversation to have. We're not taught how to have conversations about death and dying. Oh, well, Laura, sorry, you sat there in the background.
No,
I've got me back.
I've not seen you do this before.
It's my new one. Yeah, so we're not taught, we don't know how to have these conversations. And it's interesting, if you might think this has always been the case, but if you look at changing attitudes to having conversations, just a few hundred years ago, death was an everyday occurrence. There wasn't as much medicine. So death happened in the home across every age group. People died at home. People then were buried from home. So it happened in front of us all the time. And then towards the Victorian era, there became some quite formal rules around how we grieve. So we were told what we should wear and how long we should grieve for. Then we had 2 major world wars, and death happened over there. So people were killed, maybe brought back, maybe not, but the stoicism, the keep calm and carry on kind of attitude suppressed us talking about death and dying, because we had to keep that stiff upper lip. And if things moved on and people started to die in hospital, death again started happening elsewhere. In my grandmother's time, if somebody died at home, which they quite often did, there were women in the area who would come into the home, wash the body, and make sure it was part of everyday life. But we've pushed it away. And that's why it becomes uncomfortable to talk about it, why it becomes a little bit scary. But things are changing. Things are changing, and the encouragement to talk about these things is becoming, more topical. Because talking about death and dying can help. If we talk about it, it becomes less of a taboo. It becomes less of a stigma, and it can reduce anxiety. It supports emotional well-being. We get to express feelings around this and process those feelings instead of bottling them up. We can prepare ourselves. Have you noticed that when families are going to have a child, they quite often have a birth plan? And that's normal, and we can talk about that. But the thought of having a plan for what might happen if we die, even though that happens to everybody, not 50% of the population, is a much more difficult thing. We need people to know what their choices are. Not everybody knows what is available to them in terms of healthcare and what happens after death, what kind of funerals are out there. It prepares our families, and I think that's the most important thing. I've worked at the hospice for a long time, and families find it a very loving thing if they know what their loved one wants from their care and from what they want after they've died. So they don't have to think about that themselves when they're grieving. And it's such a relief to be able to have those conversations. Now, I was talking to somebody who just before said, oh, we talk about that all the time. And that is wonderful, but not everybody has that. And if we talk about it, if we're open about it, then we can do a better job of caring for people at the hospice. Mm-hmm. If we know that somebody, even down to a woman who told me it's really important when my family come that I have my lipstick on. That's just a valid wish as some of the medical decisions that people make. We all have questions and choices. How do you want to be remembered? What's lasting power of attorney? How much will my funeral cost? What kind of care would I want and not want? Do I want to be buried or cremated? Where would I prefer to die? Who will look after my dog or my cat? Who should someone contact in the event of my death? Where are all my important documents? It might be great and you might have your wills and everything planned, but if nobody knows where they are, then it doesn't help. So the main reason that we wanted to come and talk to you is that we've developed this book called What I Want You to Know. Now this lady here, this is Jackie. Jackie came to the Focus on Living Centre at St Oswald's Hospice for 8 years. She came to our women's group. She was never going to get better from the cancer that she had, but she came to us, to the women's group, where women got together and had a good laugh, had a glass of wine, talked about how things were affecting them. One thing she said, her son at that point was about 18, 19, and he wouldn't have any of these conversations with her. And it troubled her. She said, I wish there was something I could write, somewhere I could write everything down. And so we came up with the first version, much smaller version of this. So that when Jackie died, her son knew that in a drawer were all her wishes. And that young lad didn't have to think about it all himself, and it was a huge benefit. So this book can help you think about what you might want in the future. It's got lots of different sections. We haven't come up with this all on our own. We've worked with members of the public and patients to find out what people want. So there's lots of practical stuff like, what are my passwords for social media? Because if people don't know that, then your account lives on forever, and some families can find that distressing. Things like, what do I want from my funeral? Do I want it religious? Do I want everybody to wear pink? All of these things can be jotted down, and you can do it with people that you love, or you can do it completely on your own, put it away, but it's there when the time comes. It's not an easy thing for me to come and talk to you about. It's not all singing and all dancing, is it? But it is important. And I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's going to say a few words.
I'm not going to keep you long because I know that's quite heavy. My role is largely, I do one-to-one support level. So when people come for the front side support and after some of our adult silence. But also my role is community focused in the fact that I work with organisations to train people to have more compassionate, confident conversations. Businesses find it really tricky because there's the absence of any, at the moment, any statutory bereavement leave unless you have an under 18 that you're responsible for that dies, or unless you have a pregnancy loss 24 weeks on. So businesses do struggle to know on a practical level what to do and how to do it. but actually in the most recent research that was done last year, from quite a big workforce survey, was that people felt under-supported emotionally rather than practically. So my role is to go into businesses and talk about, why is it difficult to talk about? What questions do you have? Why is it complicated? What can you do for staff? And it is all about, we do have quite balanced conversations about, yes, from my perspective, I'm there because it's the right thing to do to look after people, but actually there's a really big business argument for doing it well, for retention and for recruitment and all that kind of thing. Like Davina said, it's really tricky, and if you don't have these conversations, when I support client one-to-one, those that really struggle the worst with their grief are those that have unanswered questions, that haven't had these conversations, or that are struggling with something like probate, or questions about they've gone to visit the funeral director and they didn't know what their loved one wanted. So one lady I'm supporting at the minute, for the first 3 months of her appointments with me, her weekly appointments, all she could talk about was, and her and her husband have been together since they were 16 and 18. He was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer at 75. He lived for 3 years with it, and she said at no point did I really think he was going to die. And actually that's because when it's imminent, it's actually just too hard to talk about. How do you start a conversation about the love of your life and person that you haven't known any days without? How do you start that conversation? It's too big and it is too scary at that point. And so for the first 3 months of those weekly appointments, all she talked about, and I went as a visitor at home, she's not very mobile, was she has his ashes in the hearth. And she said, I don't know if at the final hurdle, after all of the caring I gave him all of his life and in his illness, whether I've let him down at the final hurdle, because actually I don't know if he wanted to be buried. And so even in that situation, these conversations are difficult, and actually sometimes, especially in those conversations, it's difficult. So her grief was really complicated by that, and had she just said one question, do you want to be buried or cremated, she wouldn't have had to second guess herself and live with that. And it is really difficult. We do have people that, a lot of people that struggle with practical things they could have had answers to, if they'd had that courage or that support or the guidance that the booklet provides to have those conversations. So actually, if you do have, if nobody has looked at it, the gift you give to your family is that they can tend to their grief undisturbed without all of the practical and the legal stuff to deal with and all that extra worry. It is really important, but we're not great at it.
No.
We're not great at it.
And there's leaflets here. I said it is about fundraising as well, because we are asking for money for this book, because it's got printing costs. So if you're interested, there's a QR code that will take you straight to where you can buy one. And you are part of a huge community, and the tenants and the clients that you're with might have these worries as well. So if you ever want to pass on any of these leaflets to them, that would be great.